Yes, or something that's about to receive planning consent from a change of use from, a restaurant to a betting shop or fish and chip shop or something like that.
Yes, that's really important to know. Now, next question is the ownership structure. So in Portugal, I'm trying to illustrate because obviously, like I know like how the UK law in terms of ownership works. But in Portugal, if a husband buys a property, they must have the wife's name in the property. Both names has to be in the contract.
That's very interesting.
And
I didn't know that.
The children will inherit the property. So in the Portugal inheritance law, automatically your family children, your offspring, will entitle to the property. Automatically.
There is no such automatic right in the UK. Generally, your property is yours to dispose of as you see fit. You can give it all to charity if you wish. The only time you may find that there is a claim, or you won't find, your executors will find there is a claim against your will, is if, for example, you disinherit one of your children or someone who has been financially dependent on you in the past. There is a piece of legislation dating from 1975 in the UK, which states that if these people have been relying on you financially, then it'd be unjust for them to be cut off without a penny, and then they may have a claim against the estate.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Apart from that, you can do whatever you want with your property. You can destroy it or give it to charity or as you wish.
In Portugal, you're not allowed. Even if you want to disown your child, your child still has only claim. That's why there's many property are left ruined, because they imagine a family of four children, they cannot decide what to do with the property, and they don't have the fund to do it up or sell it, or they just could not decide. That's why country is full of ruined properties. And I know quite a number of people own hundreds of properties because their parents own loads and they're shared by brothers and sisters. And they have a lot of estates, but they don't know what to do with it. And that's the unfortunate circumstances of the inheritance law. Here in Portugal, you have to have husband and wife in both both names in the deed. But
but that is not the case here. You can have up to 4 names on the legal title. Those 4 people can, if they wish, hold the property on trust for an unlimited number of people. So it's a distinction between the legal interest and the beneficial interest, which is something which only exists really in common law jurisdictions like UK, Canada, etc., Australia.
So just to reiterate, Mr. Chan can just buy a property under Mr. Chan's name, and they do not need to let their wife know.
No, whether or not Mr. Chan tells Mrs. Chan is entirely his concern.
That's really... I think that's a lot of people going to be interested in that.
Well, I hope that makes Mr. Chan very happy.
Yeah, I did hear some case in Portugal where you don't have to let the wife know, or you do not have to let the authority to know that you are separated, not divorced.
Right. No,
yes, it's quite...
no such obligation over here.
Yeah.
We're a comparatively free country even now.
Okay. Now, I think I have to reschedule another meeting for you about taxes, because there's a lot of kind of confusion about taxes in terms of property tax and capital gain tax and the landlord tax, and people don't understand it, and especially as a overseas buyer, what is the entitlement? But I think we'll do a separate video because this can,
That's an incredibly complicated subject, and that is because we have twice as many pages of tax legislation as the next country, which I think is the US. So it is particularly complicated.
It's just like, it's quite worrying for an overseas buyer to buy some property in UK, and they may or may not reside in UK, and then moves, because in the social media world, they're actually teaching people to have a company to buy a UK property instead of individual purchases, because they said they can help.
These days, buying a property through a company can turn out to be very tax inefficient.
Tax inefficient.
Unless you are inefficient. If you want to sell the property at any point, not efficient.
Really?
Because generally, if you want to set up say a property owning dynasty, then perhaps you would put the property into a company, so that you can hand it on down the generation, perhaps issue shares in a company's family members, etc. However, if you part of a property, you should bear in mind that you have to pay capital gains tax, whether you're a company or an individual, unless you've lived there. Obviously, you can only claim the exemption that you've used the property as your principal private residence if you are an individual and have actually lived there as your main residence. But as you say, it's a very complex area, and I don't want to get into too much detail because we could easily go on for another half hour.
Yeah.
If we go there.
I'm sure a lot of people is going to ask you back, so
that's fine. And of course, if you buy an investment property, you'll have income coming in. You have to pay income tax on the income as well.
Yes.
You have to pay stamp duty, land tax when you buy the property. And if you buy the property in the name of the company, that becomes much more expensive, the stamp duty.
Right. You believe it or not, a lot of YouTube blogger from Hong Kong right now is teaching people to set up a company in UK to buy properties. They say the first step is open a company and that you can save taxes. That's what their advice is right now.
It was a very popular move a few years ago to set up a company, for example, in the British Virgin Islands. In fact, I believe most companies incorporated in British Virgin Islands are owned by people from Hong Kong, so they're probably familiar with the system. And that company would then buy a property over here. And when it came to inheritance, they would say that it's a $1 share in the company, which is my inheritance, not the value of the property. All of that has gone. And now it is the value of the property, which is taken into account in calculating the value of your estate. Wow. So also, there's been an additional tax, this is the last time we'll talk about tax in this interview, called the annual tax on enveloped dwellings, which applies to any property owned by a company worth more than £500,000.
Whoa.
And that is a further tax, which is paid in bands depending on the value of the property. And you have to pay it every year. So simply for holding a property in a company that's worth more than £500,000, you have to pay this extra tax.
Whoa. That's even before you have made the income tax on the rental, right?
That's before income tax, capital gains tax, and the additional stamp duty that you're paying for buying it in the name of the company.
My goodness, I don't even know what to say. And what is SDLT? That's something that.
That is stamp duty, land tax. We still call it stamp duty, even though its name changed in 2003 because it's shorter.
Yeah.
And that used to be paid in bands. But now they've changed it slightly so that it's slightly cheaper than it was if you buy below about £974,000, I think, but much more expensive above that.
Right, and okay, like I said, we move on to the next big question.
Of course, life is very taxing, but that's the subject of a good interview.
Taxing. A lot of people do not know what is a freehold and leasehold. Excuse that ignorance, because most property in Hong Kong are leasehold. So there is a shock to them to find out if they buy a house here is freehold. Sorry, in UK.
Well, because of the historical ties, obviously Hong Kong has acquired a leasehold system, and I can only apologise because it's pretty on the lessee. The most important thing you can do in buying a leasehold property is make sure that your solicitor reads the lease. It doesn't always happen, and it should happen. More importantly, that they explain it to you, because it's often written in 18th century English or in legalese. And the simple difference between a phrase like best endeavours or reasonable endeavours can make all the difference to what you actually have to do in order to comply with that obligation. Just to explain, best endeavours means you have to drop everything else. Reasonable endeavours means you have to give it a good go. So best endeavours is a much more onerous obligation on you as a tenant.
I do not understand a word what you say.
Well,
Sorry.
you cut this picture with you later.
Just a bit thick, but we'll rely on you to close any deals possible, because
Sure. So the most important point is that the lease is a very long document. It has all sorts of obligations on the leaseholder,
yeah,
and particularly as regards paying service charges, liability for repairs and decoration, what you can do in a property, what you can't do in a property. You may not be able to carry out a business there, for example. So these are things you need to find out before you spend your money.
And is it true that most apartments are leasehold in UK?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Sometimes they're sold as being as coming with a share of freehold. That doesn't mean that you don't have a leasehold interest. It means that generally the freehold will be owned either by a few individuals if it's a small property, or by a company if it's a larger property. And when you buy your lease, you also buy a share in the company which owns the freehold.
Right. That's awesome. Because interestingly, in Portugal, most apartments are freehold, which is very bizarre. Yeah. So you can have a building of 6 flats.
They can't be here because you have the problem of what they call a flying freehold, which
Right.
may be a fifth-floor apartment and without a right of support from the floors below.
Yeah, but
That's in trouble.
But if they want to sell that building, you have to get all the consent, obviously. But you pretty much have your own rights if you have an apartment in Portugal.
They can do anything.
Yeah, pretty much everything you have here is freehold.
It sounds a bit like the condo system in New York, where you have to keep the rest of the building happy in order to be able to...
Yes, they all have condo boards, and they all have lots of condo meeting here. Yeah, so it's slightly different to the UK, which is great. So it was awesome having an interview with you, Charles, and this is going to go viral, hopefully, and we're going to do many more, if you don't mind. And I'm really looking forward to come over the pond. Unfortunately, we're having this restriction just announced yesterday that we still have in quarantine from Portugal to UK.
Yes, I'm afraid so. Not on the list just yet. But to be honest, I think having seen the crowds out yesterday, that's probably not such a bad thing from your perspective. I'd be more worried about coming to the UK than going the other way at the moment.
I'll totally agree with you, because a lot of people are not wearing masks, as I've heard.
Yes, and as I've seen.
It's quite a concern to me, yeah. So here is mandatory, you have to wear a mask, going to shops, public transport, everything. But lovely talking to you, Charles, and I'm certainly going to catch up, and I'll let you know what happened on the channel.
Okay, fantastic.